Welcome to our next video in the NC Star YouTube channel. Today, as promised, we're going to be talking about using EVAAS data to drive school improvement. This is not going to be focused on a particular indicator, but just focusing on the practice in general. Today, we are very fortunate to have Tanya Turner here with us. I'm going to let herself introduce herself in a second. But I am Alessandro Montaneri, Program Administrator for Federal Programs in charge of school improvement planning statewide. And Tanya, take it away.
Hello, I'm Tanya Turner, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction in Eaton-Chowan Schools. I've been in this position for 3 years, and previous to that was a principal at the middle school for 8 years, where we used EVAAS on a regular basis to drive the instruction in our school. So I want to share with you today some of the ways that we have used EVAAS when I was a principal at the middle school, as well as how I have helped our other schools in our district use EVAAS since moving into this role. So we will be looking at ways to support kindergarten through 12th grade using various reports in the EVAAS system. So we're going to begin by just logging into EVAAS, and I have already done that, and I am on the Reports tab. Once you get to the Reports tab and you go to School Reports, we're going to first look at the Value Added report. I like looking at the Value Added report first in the position that I'm in now, as well as when I was a principal, because it gives you the big picture. The Value Added report shows the average academic growth the students make in each tested grade and subject or course in your school or district. When sufficient data is available, the reports include up to 3 years of growth measures and a 3-year average growth measure. The growth measures indicate how successful the school or district was in helping students meet the growth standard. So let's take a look at a value-added model. There are 2 models in the value-added report. You have the gain model and you have the predictive model. The gain model shows how well students did in tests that are given over consecutive years. So those examples would be your EOG reading and math in grades 3 through 8. The predictive model shows the tests that are not given in consecutive years, such as your 5th grade and 8th grade science test, your EOCs, your NCFEs. We'll look at both models and how you read each one of them, because they are a little bit different, even though the idea behind it is the same. This is the gain model. So we are looking right now at an end of grade reading, and we see grades 6, 7, and 8. And you would read this the same whether you were looking at your K2 model or whether you were looking at your model in middle school and elementary school. In the gain model, the growth standard is the expectation that students should at least make enough growth to maintain their achievement level relative to their peers statewide. So let's look and see how that represents itself on this chart. We've got 3 grade levels. We've got 3 years of data, 2015, 2016, and 2017. And again, we're looking at reading. The state NCE average is 50. What the state, or what EVAAS does, is they take the developmental scale scores of your students and they convert them to a normal curve equivalent so that the students are evenly spaced from 0 to 100 across the number line. And that way they can determine growth from one NCE to the next. So if a student is at a 47 NCE in the 6th grade, that student would be expected to maintain their position of achievement when they move to the 7th grade. So if they're a 47 in the 6th grade, they need to be at least a 47 in the 7th grade, and they at least need to be a 47 in the 8th grade. If they rise above the 47, then they have achieved more than what their peers like them across the state have achieved. If they fall below the 47, then they are falling behind the peers who are like them in the state of North Carolina. So let's look at this chart. We have the 2014 average achievement for 6th grade reading was a 47.7 NCE. So when I move, this same group of student moves to the 7th grade, they maintain that level of achievement. You see 47.7. If I come up to 2015 under 7th grade, you see that negative 0.1. That's subtracting these two numbers, and there's some decimal differences. That's why it doesn't come out to exactly 0 there. But they met growth because they maintained their level of achievement from one year to the next. And that's where this number at the top comes from. Remember that a blue is indication that there was evidence that the school students made more progress than the growth standard. Green means that the evidence shows that the school students made progress similar to the growth standard, and red means that the school students made less progress than the growth standard. So then as this group of students moved to the 8th grade, they increased their NCE to a 49.1. So if I come up to this right here, 2016, in the 8th grade, they have a 1.4, which if you take the 49.1 and subtract the 47.7, that's where the 1.4 comes from. So this cohort of students did a good job. They maintained their level of achievement from 6th grade to 7th grade, and then increased that level of achievement when they moved to the 8th grade. So this group of students improved their performance from the time they entered 6th grade till the time they exited the 8th grade and went to the high school. That's a good pattern and one that you would want to see in your school. Here's a pattern, a different kind of pattern. In 2015, this group of 6th graders ended the school year at a 46.9. When that same group of students traveled to the 7th grade, their performance decreased to a 42.7. So if I come up to the chart on 2016 7th grade, you see a red negative 4.2. That's because these students lost ground from their 6th grade to their 7th grade year. 46.9 minus the 42.7 is where this number comes from. Then when that same group of students moved on to the 8th grade, they ended their 8th grade year at a 47.9. So the good news is that group of students was able to recover. They went from a 46.9 to a 42.7 and then ended with a 47.9. So they're actually exiting the 8th grade higher than what they entered in the 6th grade. So not the pattern you want to see as far as what happened to them here in the middle, but ultimately they ended the year strong. So this chart at the bottom is a chart that you do not want to ignore because you can track your cohorts of students as they move across your school, and it'll tell you whether your students are making progress similar to their students and peers across their state or whether they are falling behind. It's important to remember that these students are being compared to students who are just like them. So it's not comparing an AIG student to an EC student. If a student is at a high performing level, they're being compared to students who are at high performing levels just like them. If they are a low performing student, they're being compared to a low performing student who are just like them. So we're looking at average achievement of similar groups of students as they move from grade to grade. So the data is valid. You are comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. So now let's look at what the predictive model would look like. So we'll choose a subject that is not tested consecutively, and we'll just go to elementary and we'll look at 5th grade science. So you see there's no chart down here at the bottom because these scores are not able to be converted to NCE because they're not given in consecutive years. So you see the developmental scale scores listed here. So in a predictive model, the prediction is done after the test. So it's not a prediction like you would normally think of when you hear the word predict. So this particular grade has 3 years of data, 2015, 16, and 17. In 2015, there was 117 students who took the 5th grade science test. Their average score was a 248.4. That was at the 34th percentile. the average predicted score was a 252. Now let's talk about where that comes from. These 117 students were matched with 117 students, or not just 117 students, but they're matched with students across the state who are just like them. So based on students who are just like these 117 across the state of North Carolina, they were predicted to score a 252, because when the test was over, the test has been administered, the scores are in, they've been validated, all the students across the state who were like these, on average, scored this, 252. Well, these students scored a 248.4. So that means they fell below their students who are just like them across the state. And if you take 252 and subtract 248.4, that's where this negative 3.5 comes from. Now in 2016, there was 127 students in the 5th grade. Based on students who were just like these 127 across the state of North Carolina, on average, those students scored a 253.1. This particular group of students scored a 251.1. When you subtract those numbers, you get this difference of a negative 2. So again, the students fell below where they should have fallen based on their achievement level in comparison to students who are just like them. In 2017, there was 148 students that took the test. Based on students who are just like these 148, they should have scored a 252.9. They scored a 253.7. So when we subtract those scores, we have an estimated difference of a 0.8, which means that particular group of students met growth. They performed as they were expected to in comparison to students across the state who were just like them. Now in this particular example, the one thing that was changed to go from this negative 3.5 to a negative 2 to a 0.8 was the focus on vocabulary. Now even though we have two negative numbers here, they are going in the right direction. We went from a negative 3.5 to a negative 2.0 to a positive 0.8. So even though our 3-year average is in the red, which we don't want to see, we still are moving in the right direction. So these students, or these teachers, are getting better at teaching their content area, and it's reflected in how the students are scoring on the test. And like I said, one difference that was done in this particular grade and subject area was the focus on vocabulary and reading across the content area. When students take the science test, they need to know what the vocabulary words mean in order to know how to answer the question. So a focus on vocabulary made a big difference in the students' performance. Once you have looked at your value-added reports in each grade or subject within your school or within your district, depending on what your position is and what data you're analyzing, you then want to take some time to reflect on what you see. So one thing that you can do to do that is use some sort of graphic organizer. For example, when I was a principal at the middle school, once the EVAAS data became available, we would have a big faculty meeting, including all of our teachers, and we would go through the value-added reports, analyzing what each report says, from the cohorts of the students to whether they met growth, didn't meet growth. And then we would talk about the results. If we were blue, if we exceeded growth, well, what did we do? What programs did we use? What strategies did we use? Is there any particular thing that was new that we tried that we haven't tried before? And we brainstorm those practices together as a group. We also talk about things that we're pleased about. What patterns are we seeing in the data? Are we making progress? Are we going in the right direction? Are we going backwards? What things are we seeing that we like about our data, and how do we know what we did in order to get those positive results? Anything that we've learned through the year, things that work, things that didn't work, changes that we need to make in our schedule, in our resources, professional development that might be showing up that we need based on particular grades or subject areas and the growth that occurred, and any concerns that we have moving forward. This can be done, again, as in a faculty meeting, and ultimately needs to be taken to your school improvement team, because this kind of data is what should drive your school improvement goals and your strategies to improve your school that school year. And then that's where you would go to what you want to do next based on the data and what it's telling you. Okay, the next report we're going to look at is the diagnostic report, which digs in a little bit deeper into the data and starts to tell the story behind the big picture. It's important to view the value-added reports in conjunction with the diagnostic reports. The value-added reports begin to paint the background, and the diagnostic report begins to put the details into the picture. The school diagnostic reports offer important information about the growth of groups of students at different achievement levels. These reports can help you reflect on how your instructional programs are supporting the academic growth of all your students. So there's 3 different types of reports within the diagnostic report. So on this particular one, we're going to go to, again, the Reports tab, School Reports and Diagnostics. And we're looking at 6th grade reading. So at the top of the chart, you see 3 tabs. The School Diagnostic, which is what we're looking at now. Then we see the School Performance Diagnostic and the School Custom Diagnostic. And we'll talk about each one of these, but right now we're going to begin with just the overall School Diagnostic. This report shows you what the growth standard is for the state, which is at 0, because if you remember from the previous report when we talked about value added, a student is expected to maintain his NCE from year to year. So if a student had a 50 NCE, they would be expected to maintain that 50 NCE the next year in the GAIN model. When you're talking about the predictive model, if a student was predicted to score at a 249 and they scored a 249, that's 0. So again, that's where your growth standard is. So if a student scores exactly where they're supposed to score, they would be right on this line and you wouldn't even see the bar. If they score above the growth standard, that's when the bar starts to rise in this direction. If they score below the growth standard, that's when their bar starts to fall below the green line. The blue bar represents the most current year, and the yellow bar represents the 2 previous years. There has to be at least 5 students to make a bar. So in this particular bar here, there wasn't enough students to make the bar, I assume, because there's no bar listed there. I'm sorry. There was enough to make the bar there, but they scored exactly where they were supposed to score the 2 previous years, so you don't see the bar. It's sitting on the line. Here, the growth standard is just below the line. You can barely see the yellow bar, and then you can see the bars better in the last 3 examples. If you come over here, these tabs show you how many students were in each one of the blue bars, the most current year. So when I look across my number line, I have 5 quintiles of students. This is my lowest 20%, my next to the lowest 20%, my middle performing 20%, my next to the highest, and my highest performing 20% in comparison to the students across the state of North Carolina. So if I'm looking at my lowest quintile, they had a growth of a -1, and there were 29 students in that group. If I click on that 29, it shows me who those 29 students were. It shows me what their NCE level was and what their performance level was. When I look at my next bar, there was 38 students in this bar. And again, you see there was 37 in the middle group, 22 in the next to the highest, and 15 in the highest group. Now, one quick thing you can see just by looking at this chart is that this group of students were probably most likely taught towards the lower end, because the students from the low to the mid performance ranges met growth. But when we move over here to the next to the highest and the highest group, they did not meet growth. So my concern would be that we're teaching from our lowest students to our average performing students, but we're not differentiating for our highest performing students. So right off the bat, I can already see for 6th grade reading, that's a growth area for my teachers that teach 6th grade reading. We're not meeting the needs of all of our different achievement levels of students. Once I've looked at what the overall chart is telling me, the next thing that I want to do is dig a little bit deeper into that data to see where our strengths and areas of weakness are. So I would have my teachers go through and do a diagnostic reflection that looks like this. So I would have each one of my grades and subject areas take this chart and lay it beside their diagnostic report that they have on their computer screen. Using this chart and a blue highlighter, a green highlighter, and a pink highlighter, we're going to go through and we're going to highlight each one of our quintiles of students and where they performed in relationship to the students who are like them across the state. So for this particular group, this represents all my students. We don't have them segregated out by race, gender, or any other kind of performance indicator. So I'm going to go to my worksheet, and under all, I know that my 0 to 20% performing students met growth. So I would color that box in green. I can even write the number negative 1.0 if I wanted to write it in the box so I can actually see what the growth standard was. My 20 to 40% also met growth, so that would be green. My 40 to 60% met growth, so that would be green. But if you remember, these two groups did not meet growth. So on my worksheet, I would color in the last two boxes under my all, representing all of my students, in pink. So it would be green, 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 pink, and pink. Now I want to say, okay, that's all my students. Let me see if I did better with one particular group of students versus another. So I can click on my subgroup tab. When I click on that tab, I want to look and see, well, how did my African American subgroup do? So I'm going to click on the black choice and hit submit. Now I have a graph that looks a little bit different than my previous graph looked. Again, I can see that I met growth with my lowest performing African American children. I actually exceeded growth with my next to the lowest. I met growth with my middle performing, but again, I lost my mid to high students. There were not enough students in my highest performing group to have a bar there. If you look over here, you see 0. So I have no bar for my highest performing quintile of students in this particular category. So if I go back to my chart, I would color in blue because I exceeded growth with, this would be met because I met growth with my lowest performing group. I exceeded growth with my 20 to 40%. I met growth with my 40 to 60%, but I did not meet growth with my 60 to 80. So that would be red or pink with your highlighter. This would be green, this would be blue, and this would be green. Then I can dig even deeper and see if I had a difference in the way my black males performed over my black females. So now I'm just going to look at my males. Well, there is a big difference. Look how well my middle group of black males performed. I met growth with my lowest, met growth with my next to the lowest. I exceeded growth at a pretty high level with my students who were in the middle. So I might even want to go say, well, who were they? And I can look and see who those students were that represented that group of students, because or that bar, because whatever I did with this group of students, I need to make sure I know, because I want to replicate that with students who are just like them. So I would come back to my sheet, and for my black males, it would be green, green, blue, and that's a blue at a high level. So did I do that well with my females? I can take my males off, and I can add my females. And I actually did very well with my next to the lowest female group in that particular category. So I met and I exceeded. So I would come back to this worksheet and I would color this green and I would color this blue. Now you get the idea. You would continue to color this chart all the way across in all categories until your chart was finished. If you have an EL subgroup, then you would want to recreate this chart and you would want to add your EL group in this chart as well. So whatever subgroups you have within your school, you want to make your chart representative of those subgroups. Once you have gone through and you have analyzed every single subgroup in your school in your diagnostic report, then you need to ask these questions. Based on the data, what are your greatest strengths? What have we done as a school to create those strengths? Well, we know just from the little bit that we've looked at, we do a very good job teaching our low-performing students, especially our black males and females who are low-performing. We exceeded growth with that particular subgroup. That's definitely a strength, and we need to pinpoint what we're doing in order to get those results so that we capture those strategies and continue to use them. We also need to ask ourselves what our greatest opportunities for improvement are. Well, we noticed at the very beginning when we were looking at our all category that we were not meeting the growth of our highest and our next to highest students. So we need to figure out what are we not doing with those particular students. I could even come back to my chart and say, well, let me check out my AIG students since my high performing students are not doing well, and see what that particular category looks like. And there you go. We had one student in the mid to high that was AIG and 9 in our highest, and they are not meeting growth. So we definitely know that we are not doing a good job with our AIG students in this particular grade and subject area. So then we also need to ask ourselves, are other grades and subject areas meeting the growth of AIG students? Is this a problem school-wide, or is it just a problem in one subject area or one grade level? This chart will let you know that, and if you start to see a pattern across your school that this is an area that needs to be improved, then you have a focus for your professional development for the school year. And then this last question, what are possible intervention strategies that may be used to improve our areas of greatest opportunity for improvement, and how will we know if these strategies are effective? Well, that's where your goals are going to come in on your school improvement plan. You're going to write SMART goals that you can use to target areas that you know you need to improve and have a way to measure those areas to see if you are successful. Those areas might include professional development. It might include the purchase of a resource or software. It may just be your teachers coming together and determining what practices worked and which practices did not work, and what needs to be changed about the practices they're currently using. So your teachers are the experts. Remember, EVAAS is not going to tell you how to fix whatever is wrong. It's not going to tell you what to do to fix this problem right here. It's going to show you there's a problem right here. When we go back to our value added report, it's going to show you where your problems are by just looking at the red, but it's not going to tell you how to fix them. It's up to you as educational experts to dig into that data and determine what strategies, resources, professional development you need to use to correct the problems that you see in your reports. When we go back to the first screen of our diagnostic report, remember we said we had 3 tabs at the top that you can use. Okay, when we go back to our first screen of the diagnostic report, we're going to take a look at what this second tab is used for, and that's called the School Performance Diagnostic. The School Performance Diagnostic places students in groups based on state performance level ranges in which they are expected to score. So this is available for your EOGs and your EOCs only. So what's important to remember about this is it's going to place students into the level that they were expected to score in based on their testing history. So this group of students right here that are your level 1 students, everybody in this bar is put here because they were expected to score a level 1. It does not mean they scored a level 1. This group are the students who were expected to score a level 2. These were expected to score a level 3. These were expected to score a 4, and these were expected to score a 5. Now, based on the bars, you can start to make some inferences without even opening the tabs to the side to see what the students actually scored. When I'm looking at this bar, I can tell that my highest group of students, which we saw in the first report, did not meet growth. So we're not meeting the needs of the highest performing students. So my guess would be when I click on this level 5, these 10 students are not going to score at the level they were supposed to have scored. So if I click on it, I can look and see that of the students who are expected to score a level 5, 2 students scored a level 4. Now you might say, well, how did that result in such low growth? Well, just because they scored a level 5 does not mean they scored at the same level within that 5 as they have in previous years or where they were expected to score in comparison to students who were just like them across the state. So this particular student who was a level 5 at the 99 NCE, that student probably did score exactly where they were supposed to because you can't get much higher than a 99. But this student who scored at the 75 NCE might have been expected to score at the 99 NCE and did not. So that's why this bar fell below the line. So that's how you read the school performance diagnostic report. It's based on where the students were expected to score and where they actually scored. If I look at the students in the middle, there were 19 of them. These students were expected to score level 3. But then when I start scrolling through, look at all the ones who scored a level 4. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 students in this group who scored a level 4, though they were expected to score a level 3. There were a few who scored a level 2, though they were expected to score a level 3. And then you have others that did score the level 3. So that's how you read this report. So you can use this report just to see, are you moving your students from level to level in the right direction? Now this last tab is one of my favorites, and it was one of my teachers' favorites. This is the school custom diagnostic. This report is a good report for teacher reflection. So when I'm looking at this report, I'm going to be able to, as a teacher, to determine how well I did with my lowest performing students, my middle performing students, and my highest performing students. It's very similar to your teacher effectiveness report that you get later in EVAAS that comes out later in the fall, the second release. So your teachers can actually go through and determine what their effectiveness is going to be before they ever get the actual report. And then you can do some individual reflection and some preparation for the students that they have this current year. So if I'm a 6th grade teacher, reading teacher, I'm going to go into this report and I'm going to click all the students that I taught last school year in 6th grade reading. I'm just going to go through, check all my students. After I've selected all the students that I taught last school year, then I'm going to go through and I'm going to hit submit at the bottom of the report, or create. And I get a bar graph that looks like this. This is telling me that I did a pretty good job of teaching my low students, even though my bar is falling below the line, which I don't want to see go too far. I did a really good job of teaching my average students, but I did not do a very good job at all of teaching my highest performing students. So if I'm an administrator looking at this report, I would say this teacher teaches to the middle because her middle students are performing well. She's almost losing her low students, and she has lost her high students. So this teacher needs to learn how to differentiate. She's teaching straight down the middle, not addressing the needs of her lowest learners and not addressing the needs of her highest learners. If I come up to the top and hit the print button, that's going to take this report to a PDF. It can be saved. It tells you what your growth effect was for your lowest, your middle, and your highest. You can definitely see where the greatest area of need is. And then it goes through and tells you, well, who were those students in that lowest group, who were those students in the middle group, and who were those students in the highest group. I would save that report. I would do a reflection activity with your teachers so they could go through and talk about their areas of strength and their areas of need, and a chart that I would use to do that. Okay, so here I would have that teacher go in and put her growth index for her lowest performing students, her growth index for her middle performing students, and her growth index for her highest. And then, based on that, ask these questions, or answer these questions. I know this is my strength because, well, I know my potential strength of the one that we just looked at was this middle group. How does she know that was her strength? Well, they exceeded growth for one, and she could begin to brainstorm other things that happen within her classroom, maybe her benchmark assessments and other points of data that she could talk about. She could also talk about the strategies that she used in her classroom to get those results. Why does she think her middle students exceeded growth and that was the only particular group? So she could talk about those strategies here. Then she needs to look at her opportunities for improvement. Well, the biggest one is this, the highest group, because she did not meet growth. It was like a -5 point something. So she would put that group here, but she does not also want to leave out that she didn't do that well with her lowest either. So she needs to ask the question, how does my impact on this group compare with the school and or colleagues? That's an important question because she might find out if she teaches on the same grade level and subject area as other teachers, what if their chart looks different? What if another teacher's chart's greatest strength was her highest students? Well, then this teacher needs to get together with that teacher and ask her, what did you do to get that result for your highest performing students? They can learn from each other. What do I need to ask myself about this group's performance? My specific desired result is what, and what are my strategies for improvement? So her desired result would be that she wants to differentiate her instruction so that she gets strong growth from all three of her levels of it, her students at 3 different achievement levels. So what is she going to do to differentiate instruction in her classroom? She's going to first of all have to figure that out by talking to other teachers, maybe asking her administrator for input, maybe seeking out professional development to help her in the area of differentiation. But 9 times out of 10, there's going to be other teachers in your school who have a different growth index for each one of these levels of achievement than any one particular teacher. So that will bring your school together as a PLC and help them learn from each other and grow together as a grade level, subject area, or school. After you have looked at your school custom diagnostic report for your teachers to see what effect they had on teaching the students they had that previous year, the next thing you want to do is very powerful. You want to have them create a custom diagnostic report for the students that they currently have in their classroom. So in this particular report, we were looking at 6th grade reading. So I, as a 6th grade teacher, would need to go to I would need to go back to my elementary school and look at my 5th grade students. So I'm going to go to 5th grade reading, and I'm going to create a custom diagnostic report for the students that I have this current year. So I'll go through and say, okay, right now I'm teaching these students. And remember, the teacher has had no effect on these students at this point because we're early fall, but we want to see how the students fall in their achievement based on how they finished the school year last year. And then I'm going to create a report just like I did last time. And I get this report. Well, the interesting thing about this is very similar to what my effect was on the students that I taught the previous year. The average students, again, perform well. They didn't exceed growth. They met growth. But my lowest performing students and my highest performing students did not meet growth. So if I have this same pattern for the students that I'm currently teaching, this is the effect I had on my students that I taught the previous year, I know right off the bat that I've got to do something different. Because if I teach this group of students the same way I taught my students last year, I'm going to get these same results. So I have definitely got to find a way to differentiate for these highest performing students and these lowest performing students in order to make sure that they grow this year. Because we all know that when students have 2 years of the same type of instruction, then we're starting to really damage them in their achievement and their future in school. So what I would have the teachers do is come up again to the print, take this to a PDF and save it. I would have the teachers print this out, put it in their data notebook, and somewhere at the top of this report just write before or beginning of the year. And then at the end of next school year, they'll go in and they'll create the same school diagnostic report for these students after they have taught them for a whole year, and they'll be able to lay these reports side by side. And they'll be able to see, did I make a difference? Are my bars still in the same place they were when these students came to me at the beginning of the year? Did this highest group of students rise above the line? If they did, then I can have a huge celebration because I took the students from way down here to above the line, and I know I made a difference in the students' learning for that one school year. Did I maintain this group of students' performance? Did I improve it? And what did I do with my lowest level students? So they can lay those reports side by side. Powerful piece of reflection. Can be a scary piece for teachers, but we can't grow professionally unless we look at pieces of data like this and know where our areas of strength and our areas of greatest opportunities for growth lie. So this is a perfect report for administrators to use to grow their teachers, and it's an important report for teachers to use for self-reflection. And remember, Standard 5 in your NCFEs evaluation instrument is all about reflection, and this is where those reflections can originate. A powerful tool to use with some of your teachers, depending on the grade and subject area and what you're trying to get your teachers to see within the school diagnostic report, is one that I did with the high school teachers in our district. I'm going to go to our high school, and I'm going to show you a pattern that I saw in looking at our history teachers' results. So here's world history. This is the school diagnostic report. Very quickly, based on what I've already shared with you about the diagnostic report, you can see that in world history, our area of strength is our highest performing students. Not so in any other quintile. So let's look at our next subject of history, which is civics and economics. Again, you see a similar pattern. It is a little better than world history. As we start to move up the quintiles, our bars do rise above the line, but still we can see the pattern of our lowest performing students are falling below the line and not meeting growth. So now let's look at American History 1. Similar pattern. Our highest performing students are doing well, but as we move across the other quintiles, again, that's better than the last two in that they're meeting growth, but we're still not meeting the needs of these students at the same level or rate as we are our highest performing students. And then finally, we'll look at American History 2. And we see a similar pattern. Our highest group only had one student, so we don't have a bar. But again, our lowest performing students are not doing well. So if you want your teachers to discover this type of data trend, you can use a report similar to this. In this particular example, we brought all the history teachers together in a PLC. We walked through the diagnostic report for each one of the courses in history. So they would put their world history in this blank, or American history, or civics, and then they would go through and say, well, what are my quintile strengths? What are my quintile areas of improvement? And what we were able to determine after we went through and we did all the quintile strengths and areas for improvement was that in our history department, we were not meeting the needs of our lowest performing students, but we were meeting the needs of our highest performing students. So that started getting us to question things like, well, why are our highest performing students doing well in history, and why are our lowest performing students not doing well? And the answer was that our history NCFE tests are all reading. They're primary documents, they're informational reading, and it's reading at a very high level. So our students that are in these courses are at all reading levels. When you're talking about informational text and primary documents, you're talking about thinking at a very high level. So it's challenging these higher level students, which is probably causing them to push themselves and grow in this area, while our lowest performing students probably are having a very difficult time just getting through the text. They don't know what the vocabulary words are, much less what they mean, so they are not answering the questions correctly at a very high rate. So we could put strategies in place like understanding what tier 2 words are, what tier 3 words are, working on vocabulary with our students, working on reading strategies with our students, teaching them to chunk the text, teaching them to attack the questions and ask themselves, is this a cause and effect question? If so, then how do you diagram that piece of text out so that the students can determine what is the cause, what is the effect, what is the main event that's being talked about in this particular piece of history that they're reading about. So these are the strategies that your teachers can come up with just by looking at the data and determining where their areas of strength and areas of improvement lie. Okay, another report that we're going to look at in EVAAS falls under the other reports, and it's called the School Academic Preparedness Report. This report is the only report that's current in the EVAAS suite of reports. So when I say current, if I'm a 10th grade English 2 teacher and the academic preparedness report gets loaded into EVAAS, I can go to this report and know that the students that are contained in here are the students that I'm currently teaching. All the other reports in EVAAS are a year old, so you have to go back and reflect on the previous year with those reports to make decisions about what you need to do the current year. So on this report, this is telling me that these are all the students that are enrolled in English 2 for this current school year. It's telling me that 49 of those students have a greater than or equal to 70% chance of scoring a 3, which is 31% of my class. It's telling me that 26 students have a 40 to 70% chance of making a 3, which is 17% of my class. And it's telling me that 72 students have a less than or equal to 40% chance of making a 3, which is 46% of my class. So this is basically telling me at a quick glance that half of the students that are in English 2 have less than or equal to a 40% chance of making a 3. So if I'm a teacher who has not had success with low performing students, I've got a problem, because 50% of my students are low performing. If I'm a teacher who has had great success with students who are low performing, then I'm in good shape with these 72. If I've not had a good rate or a good effect on my students who are operating at a higher level, then these 49 students may be areas that I'm going to have to work on in order to make sure that I meet their needs. So this right here can connect right back to the report that we looked at with teacher effectiveness to determine, where my areas of strength and need are going to be as a teacher with the kinds of students that I'm going to be teaching this particular year. So all these students are highlighted in blue, which means that it'll take you to a sheet that's going to tell you who these students are. So let's look at the students who are the lower performing, and they have less than a 40% chance of passing the English 2. It's going to put a spreadsheet up on your computer. It's going to list your students, their sex, their race, their grade level, whether they're AIG, LEP, or a student with disability. Then it's going to tell them their achievement probability. I like to sort this column, so if you click on any of the columns at the top, it will sort it for you. And it's going to sort them from the students who have the lowest possible chance of making a level 3 all the way up to the students who have a 39.6% chance of making a level 3. So one thing that I would have my teachers do is go through and complete a student monitoring chart. So what the teachers will do is they'll go in and they'll click on each one of those groups of students and they'll complete this chart. You could print out an electronic copy of this and have the same information, but when you have to go through the sheet yourself and you have to write down the student's name and their projection, it just personalizes the information for you, and it helps you get the names of those students in your head so that when you're teaching them, when you're planning your lessons, when you're calling on them in class to answer a question, as you're moving around the room and you're monitoring, you have that student in the back of your head as saying, oh, that student only has a 0.1% chance of passing. Maybe that's why they're just sitting in their seat not doing anything. They don't know what to do. They're struggling, they're frustrated. So that's going to make you treat that student much differently than if you didn't know that information about that child. So I'm going to come through and I'm going to write all my students' names, and I'm going to write them in order from those students who have that 0.1% chance all the way up to that student who has that 39.6% chance. Now the next thing you need to really think about in regards to this column is, are you going to teach the student with the 0.1% chance of passing the same way you're going to teach the student with the 39.6% chance of passing? We would hope not, because we know that the student who has that 39.6% chance of passing is much more capable of mastering that content than the student who's down here at the 0.1. So you might even want to have your teachers draw lines or boxes around groups of students based on their performance level. This report is also good for you to make your classes. I would think at a high school level, these students would be the students in your honors classes. These students would not be students in your honors classes. These could be a mixture of both. You may have a student who has a 69.9% chance of passing in this group that would fit much better in an honors class than they would a regular class. Also at the middle school level, this report is good to decide who are going to be your Math 1 students, who are going to be your students that might take earth and environmental science at the middle school level before coming to the high school. Who are your students, if you have fortunate enough to have a budget to have reading academies or math academies or some type of nurturing group in your school for students who need more enrichment. These reports are really good to determine who are the students that need to go in that group. maybe students who are not AIG but are all making 99.9% or have a 99.9% chance of passing. Maybe they need to be included in those AIG groups at your elementary or your middle school level. So these reports are great reports to use to place students and to group them based on what their projections are for passing the test. Now, as I said earlier, for this particular report, it's only going to be for your EOCs or your EOGs. But you can also do this same type of report for your other tested subjects, such as your NCFEs, but you have to create a custom student report for that. So if I go to Custom Student Report, you're going to have a tab that says Create a New Report, and you can name it for whatever you want to look at. Let's say I want to look at physics. So I'm going to create a report for physics. I'm going to look at my students who are at the high school. For this particular report, I won't worry about race, sex, or demographics because I want all my students in the report. So I'm going to come down to the North Carolina Final Exam. And again, if you look here, you can do a custom student report even for your EOGs, for your EOCs, any test that you have in your school, your CTEs, your AP. So this can be done for any test that is given in the state for your school. Then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to find my physics. Alright, you have two reports. It gives you a report predicting who your students are that are predicted, or what their chances are of scoring above the 50th percentile and above the 80th percentile. Depending on what you're trying to do, you might want to look at both, you might only want to look at one. Just to show you how to do the report, I'm just going to choose above the 50th percentile. Now for this, you want to put, what I would do if I want all my students is I want anybody that has a 0% chance of scoring above the 50th percentile to a 100% chance of scoring above the 50th percentile. And then I hit submit. So I get a list of students, again with all their demographic information, what their probability is of scoring above the 50th percentile, and then what their actual percentile projection is. So I'm going to sort it again. So all of these students, look at all the students in that particular school that have a 0.1% chance of scoring above the 50th percentile in physics. So that would probably tell me that I should have very few students in physics class based on the performance of these kids. And I'm on page 2 now, and I've not gotten to a whole number yet, but I've got 6 pages to go because it's listed all the students in the school. You can go back when you create your report and you can limit it to a certain grade level. Let me show you how to do that. I did not do that when I did the initial report. Here I have any grade. So in physics, let's just say I want to look at just the students who are in the 11th grade that should be taking physics. Then I'm going to have a much shorter report. I'm going to have 2 pages versus 6. And the students in the 11th grade are going to have had more science and math classes, so their probabilities are probably going to be a little bit better, but still you see many students, we're all the way down to here before we ever get to a whole number. So if some of these students are signing up for physics, you know, we might need to have a conversation with them about what they want to do past high school, and is physics really the best option for them and what their goals are past high school graduation. So that's how you can use the custom student report. And again, you can create a monitoring chart that's specific to an NCFE. This would be an example of what one might look like, where you can write down the student's name and projection for having a 50% or better probability of scoring 80 percentile or greater, students who have a 50% or better probability of scoring 50 percentile or greater, and students who have less than a 50% probability of scoring a 50 percentile or greater. so you can kind of get that same idea. And for your NCFEs that you know students will have to take, such as your history classes, such as English 1, English 3, English 4, Math 2, well, Math 3 is now going to be an EOC, but these monitoring charts for those NCFEs that you know the students have to take are good charts for you to know how to differentiate for the students who are in that class. Also for how to place your honors kids, how to place your regular kids, also for your AP placement. It will tell you who should be there and who should not. The next report we're going to talk about is a report that I created using the diagnostic report, but it's with the K2 model. For those of you that work in a K2 school, whether you're an administrator or a teacher, I'm sure you can find it frustrating sometimes to know how EVAAS can benefit you and your students in your school. So I'm going to show you a very nice chart that can help you do this, and you can create the same chart in your school. So we're going to look at the K2 assessment in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, and I'm going to show you how I created a chart that helped teachers goal set with their students to know where the students needed to go based on where they were when they entered their particular grade or subject. So let's start, we'll just look at 1st grade as an example. Again, here's the diagnostic report, and we've already talked about how to read a diagnostic report. Over here on the tabs, again, you have the students who make up each one of those quintiles. To make the K2 chart that I'm getting ready to show you, I'm going to explain to you where the data comes from. So if I go to the lowest group of students in this quintile, and I look at where their NCE was and their performance level was, that's going to be my starting point. So I went through each grade level in the K2 school, and I wrote down in each grade level what an NCE equated to as far as their reading performance level. So this student had an NCE of a 15. They had a performance level of a C in reading. This particular student had an NCE of a 3, which equated to an RB. This one had a 28, which equated to an E, a 20 to a D, so on and so forth. So I would go through each one of these levels, and I would write down the NCE and the corresponding reading level. Then what I would do is go to the next grade level. So this was 1st grade, so now I'm going to go to 2nd grade. Well, remember the idea of growth in the EVAAS model for tests that are given in consecutive years is that each student maintain their level of achievement. So if a student was a 28 NCE when they left the 1st grade, we would want them to be at least a 28 NCE when they leave the 2nd grade. But if you notice, a 28 NCE in the 1st grade is different than a 28 NCE in the 2nd grade. They're expected to show growth. So now I'm going to show you the chart. So here's my chart, and it's got all of the reading level performances for each grade level and what the NCE is that reading level equates to. So we know kindergarten is measured from middle of the year to end of the year, and 1st and 2nd grade is measured from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So we've got kindergarten, middle of the year to end of year, 1st and 2nd grade from beginning of the year to end of the year. Now my chart is based on end of year to end of year because that's when we get EVAAS. So actually this chart is probably expecting students to score even a little bit higher than what they would be scoring if you accounted for the summer slide. So let's look at kindergarten. At the end of kindergarten, this group of students scored an RB that equated to a 21. Well, if I want this group of students to maintain their position of achievement in comparison to students who are just like them across the state of North Carolina, I would expect them to maintain that 21 at the end of first grade. Well, after going through that diagnostic report in each grade and grade level, I found out that this range contained the score of a 21. So if a student was an RB 21 in the kindergarten year, they would need to be at a D or E level at the end of their first grade year in order to have met their year of growth. And then when they move on to second grade, they're going to have to be at the G or H reading level in order to maintain their position of achievement and meet their growth. So we've gone from an RB to a DE to a GH. Now you might not want your students at the end of grade 2 to be at a GH because we know we want them to be at a level N at the end of M at the end of second grade, but this student went from an RB all the way to a level H, which would be very impressive for their level of growth as they move through the elementary school. If we take another example, this letter G at the end of kindergarten would be a very high performing student. So their NCE was between an 80 and an 83. When they moved to the first grade, in order to maintain that 80 to 83, they would have to be at somewhere between that M and N. And then to maintain that same level when they get to the second grade, they would have to be at an R. So this is 3 years worth of data. The only thing that changes each year is this number range gets a little bit tighter as we get more data points. But everything has remained consistent from year to year as far as the reading level and the NCE. So the teachers at the K2 school in my district use this chart for growth setting for their students, or goal setting for their students at the beginning of the year. They know if they get this group of students as a first grade teacher that left kindergarten at a 21 NCE and RB level, they know where they've got to get them by the end of their first grade year. Now, if those students end up getting the D or E level in March, do those teachers quit teaching and say, okay, they've met their level? No, they keep pushing them, and some of these students can actually catch up with their peers. They might have been just a little bit developmentally delayed when they entered kindergarten, but then after a year of schooling, they've been able to catch up with their peers. Some of the higher performing students may level out. So this chart has been very helpful for the teachers to plan instruction. It's been helpful for the teachers to conference with the parents, because now they can work with their parents as partners in their child's education to know here's where they're starting, here's where they need to get. And that's a tangible goal for everybody, for the student, for the parent, and for the teacher, so everyone can work together. And then when they have the MTSS meetings and the students and the teachers and the administrators come together to discuss the children, they can talk about where they are and where in relationship to where they need to be, what strategies are being used if the student is not on pace to get there. Maybe is there an issue with the student's learning that needs to be investigated further. So all of these things can be used to help the students make the growth that they need to make based on the data that has been collected over these past several years.
Well, thank you, Tanya, for sharing all that information. There's, as you can see, there's a lot of work that Edenton Chapter Schools has done in making sure to build this data culture where EVAAS is constantly looked at. We are very lucky to have Tanya Turner with us in this video, sharing all those strategies and all those different reports that EVAAS has available to continue improving schools in North Carolina. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you. I enjoyed being here.